For 8 years, Victoria Morgan had built her life around Ethan. Together, they owned a beauty salon in Boston, a place that had grown from a modest neighborhood shop into a fashionable destination downtown. It wasn't just their business, it was their shared dream, a symbol of everything they had achieved side by side. To their employees, the Morgans seemed like a strong couple, partners in work and in life. To Victoria, that had always been true, or at least she thought it was. That December evening, the salon hosted its holiday party in one of Boston's most elegant downtown nightclubs. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the dance floor. Champagne glasses clinked, and laughter floated through the air. Victoria had spent the week preparing, making sure everything looked perfect. She wanted her staff to feel appreciated, to celebrate a year of hard work. She wore a simple but elegant black dress, her hair swept into a soft updo, her smile carrying the calm confidence of a woman who had grown into her role as both manager and owner. Ethan stood beside her in a tailored suit, greeting employees, shaking hands, enjoying the attention. They looked from the outside like a power couple, but illusions never last long. Victoria turned from the bar, holding 2 glasses of champagne, and froze. Just a few feet away, beneath the warm glow of the lights, Ethan was kissing one of their junior stylists. The girl couldn't have been more than 22. Her hands rested lightly on his chest, her lips pressed against his, and Ethan wasn't pushing her away. He leaned into it, smiling, careless of the dozens of eyes around them. The room seemed to go silent. Victoria's breath caught, the glasses in her hands trembling. For a moment, she couldn't move. 8 years of marriage, of trust, of building something together, shattered in a single, public kiss. Colleagues whispered behind manicured hands, a ripple of shock running through the staff. Ethan didn't even glance her way. The champagne flutes clinked together as Victoria set them down, her vision blurring. Her heart pounded, not with anger, but with a numbness so deep it felt like the ground had opened beneath her feet. Without a word, she turned and walked away. The December air outside hit her like a slap. Boston's winter night was cruel and sharp, the wind biting through her thin dress. She hadn't thought to grab her coat. Her heels clicked against the icy pavement as she stumbled toward the side alley, desperate to escape the muffled music and the humiliation still echoing inside. And then she saw him. A man lay slumped near the club service entrance, his white shirt wrinkled, his tie loosened, a smear of blood on his lower lip. 2 security guards hovered nearby, debating whether to let him sleep it off or push him onto the street. "He's breathing," one said with indifference. "Not our problem," the other replied. The man groaned, trying to sit up. His dark hair was messy, his jaw shadowed with stubble, but when his eyes flickered open for a moment, they were startlingly clear. Hazel, sharp even through the haze of alcohol. Victoria's instincts took over before she could question herself. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, mirroring the same brokenness she felt. Maybe it was the reckless urge to do something, anything, that might distract her from the betrayal still burning in her chest. "He's with me," she heard herself say, stepping forward. The guards exchanged skeptical glances, but didn't argue. The man tried to stand, swaying. Victoria slipped an arm under his, steadying him. He looked down at her with confusion and a faint, hoarse whisper. "Why?" "Don't talk," she murmured. "Just walk." They moved slowly toward the street. A taxi pulled up, its headlights slicing through the cold night. Victoria gave the driver an address she didn't recognize. The man's voice had managed to form a street name, somewhere in a quieter part of the city. The ride was silent. He leaned against the window, his breath fogging the glass, while Victoria sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Her pulse hadn't slowed since the moment she'd seen Ethan with that girl. Now, instead of anger, she felt an odd, reckless calm. She had no idea who this stranger was, or why she was helping him. All she knew was that she couldn't go back inside that club, couldn't face the lies, the whispers, the false smile Ethan would surely wear if she did. When the cab pulled up to an old brick building on a quiet street, Victoria paid the driver and guided the man inside. His apartment was small, but surprisingly tidy. Books stacked neatly on shelves, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. For a moment, Victoria simply stood there, not sure what she was doing. The man, Gabriel Reed, though she didn't know his name yet, looked at her with a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. His voice, rough from drink and pain, broke the silence. "Thank you." Victoria didn't reply. She wasn't ready to speak, not after what she had witnessed that night. She only nodded, her hand still gripping the strap of her purse as if it were the only solid thing in her world. Somewhere back at the nightclub, Ethan was probably laughing, drinking, pretending nothing had happened. But here, in this quiet apartment with a stranger barely able to stand, Victoria felt the first flicker of something unexpected. Not relief, not hope, but a step away from a life she thought she knew. And she didn't look back. Gabriel's apartment was nothing like what Victoria expected. She had braced herself for chaos. Empty bottles scattered across the floor, clothes tossed in piles, the stale odor of alcohol. Instead, when she helped him inside, she found herself standing in a space that was small but meticulously kept. The living room was lined with bookshelves, medical journals stacked neatly on the coffee table. A clean kitchen gleamed under the fluorescent light, and the faint scent of soap lingered in the air. It was disorienting. A man she had just seen collapsed outside a nightclub lived here in order, in discipline. She felt like an intruder. Yet Gabriel moved through the apartment as if he belonged to it completely, even in his unsteady state. He disappeared into the bathroom, the sound of running water filling the silence, while Victoria stood in the middle of the living room, clutching her coat around her shoulders. She should have left. Every reasonable part of her screamed that this was madness. She had just walked away from her husband kissing another woman, and now she was in a stranger's apartment, far from home. But reason had been stripped away the moment Ethan leaned into that kiss. Her life, 8 years of loyalty, love, and labor, had been reduced to a public humiliation. When Gabriel reemerged, his hair damp, wearing simple sweatpants and a t-shirt, he looked different. Clean, younger somehow, his features softer, but his eyes clearer. He gave her a faint, almost embarrassed smile. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice low. "I must look pathetic." Victoria shook her head, though her throat felt tight. "You don't." They stood in silence, the air between them heavy with things unsaid. He didn't ask why she had helped him, and she didn't explain. It was as though both of them understood that explanations didn't matter tonight. What mattered was the ache in her chest, the hollow where trust had been ripped away, and the strange comfort of being in a place untouched by Ethan's betrayal. When she stepped closer, it wasn't deliberate. It was instinct. Gabriel didn't move away. His body radiated warmth, steady despite the lingering scent of alcohol. She reached for him, hesitant at first, then with the urgency of someone desperate to drown out pain. The kiss was soft, almost cautious, and for a moment Victoria thought he might resist. But he didn't. He let her lead, his hands uncertain but not rejecting, his lips meeting hers in a rhythm that spoke more of sorrow than passion. They moved together slowly, carefully, as though they both knew this wasn't about desire. It was about forgetting, even just for a few hours, the wounds they carried. Later, when they lay side by side, the city muffled beyond the windows, Victoria stared at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the scene at the nightclub, the stunned faces of her staff, the smirk on Ethan's lips, the sting of betrayal. She closed her eyes, pressing her hand against Gabriel's chest as if to steady herself against the weight of it all. He didn't speak. He didn't ask for promises or confessions. He simply allowed her to exist in the quiet, and that silence was its own kind of mercy. By dawn, the haze of desperation lifted. The pale Boston sunlight filtered through the blinds, revealing the stark reality of where she was and what she had done. The sound of clinking dishes came from the kitchen, And when Victoria sat up, she saw Gabriel at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, a plate of toast waiting on the table. He turned to her, a trace of warmth in his expression. "Good morning," he said gently. The kindness in his voice pierced her more than cruelty ever could. Shame surged through her chest. She rose quickly, gathering her things, avoiding his eyes. "I shouldn't have stayed," she whispered. "Wait," Gabriel said softly, stepping toward her. "At least tell me your name." Victoria hesitated at the door, her coat half on. "Victoria," she muttered, then shook her head. It was a mistake. She didn't look back as she left. The cold air outside Boston's streets hit her again, but this time it wasn't shocking. It was sobering. The night had been nothing more than a desperate grasp at relief. She repeated it to herself with every step. It was a mistake. A mistake. When she returned home, Ethan was sitting in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, scrolling through his phone as if the night before had never happened. He looked up with a smile that made her stomach turn. "There you are," he said casually. "You left the party so suddenly. Everyone asked about you." Victoria stood in the doorway, staring at him. His tone was light, his eyes calm, as if he hadn't kissed another woman in front of half their employees. He sipped his coffee, pretending nothing had happened. And in that moment, she realized something even more devastating than the betrayal itself. Ethan would never acknowledge it. He would bury it, smile through it, and expect her to do the same. Victoria felt her skin crawl. The walls of the house that once symbolized partnership now felt like a prison. And as Ethan set down his mug, humming to himself, she knew, no matter how she tried to convince herself otherwise, life with him would never be the same again. In the days that followed, Ethan transformed, or at least he tried to. He arrived home earlier than usual, carrying bouquets of roses wrapped in brown paper, their scent filling the kitchen as if flowers could erase betrayal. He booked dinner reservations at upscale restaurants near Back Bay, insisting they enjoy candlelit evenings together. He even began to talk, almost casually, about starting a family, the very conversation he had avoided for years. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a renaissance of their marriage. Neighbors would have smiled at the sight of Ethan helping Victoria into her coat, holding doors open for her, making small, affectionate gestures in public. But Victoria saw the cracks beneath the performance. She had lived with him long enough to know when his eyes darted too quickly, when his smile was just a mask. At home, Ethan's phone became an extension of his hand. He set it face down on the counter whenever she walked into the room, silenced notifications before bed, and stepped into the hallway to answer calls. Once, while they sat together on the couch, she saw the screen light up. The preview of a message glowed before he could snatch the phone away. "I miss you, Ethan. When will you talk to her?" Her stomach twisted, but she said nothing. The charade was exhausting, yet she played along, pretending not to notice, pretending she believed in the sudden flowers and rehearsed tenderness, pretending their life was untouched. But inside, guilt festered alongside revulsion. She carried a secret of her own, her night with Gabriel, a single night born of despair. Yet it sat heavy in her chest, a silent accusation she couldn't ignore. The weight of it all began to suffocate her. At the salon, she smiled at clients, directed her staff, and answered emails. But every so often she caught her reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, lips pressed tight, a woman playing a role she no longer believed in. One crisp morning in January, the illusion shattered further. Victoria awoke nauseous, clutching her stomach as she rushed to the bathroom. She leaned over the sink, trembling. A faint dread pulsed through her veins as she counted the days she had ignored. Her cycle was late, far later than it should have been. Panic clawed at her throat. She dressed quickly, pulled a scarf around her neck, and slipped out of the apartment before Ethan had even finished his shower. She walked briskly through the biting cold to a pharmacy several blocks away, deliberately choosing one where no one might recognize her. The clerk bagged the small rectangular box without a glance, but Victoria's hands shook as she carried it home. In the bathroom, she followed the instructions with mechanical precision, setting the test on the counter and pacing, unable to breathe. When the result appeared, it was instant, two bold, unmistakable lines. Positive. She sank onto the edge of the tub, staring at the plastic stick as if it could explain itself. Her mind spiraled. The baby could be Ethan's. They had been together that week, sharing the bed as part of Ethan's sudden campaign of marital revival. But it could just as easily be Gabriel's. The timing overlapped in a cruel, mocking way that offered no certainty. Her heart pounded in her ears. The walls of the bathroom seemed to close in, the mirror reflecting a stranger's pale, stricken face. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, but felt nothing, only the enormity of what had just been thrust upon her. The nausea rose again, sharper this time, and she doubled over, gripping the sink. Tears stung her eyes. A child, conceived in the shadow of betrayal, tangled in lies and secrets. How could she possibly bring it into this world? How could she raise a baby while her marriage disintegrated and her heart carried the weight of a single reckless night? By the time Ethan came into the kitchen, freshly shaved and humming under his breath, Victoria had hidden the test deep inside her purse. He kissed her on the forehead, oblivious, talking about a client meeting scheduled for the afternoon. She nodded at all the right places, her face a mask of calm, while inside her body shook with dread. That evening, when Ethan poured wine and talked again about how the time was right for them to think about children, Victoria's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She wanted to scream the truth at him, to throw the test on the table, to demand what kind of father he thought he could be when his loyalty was already elsewhere. But the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she smiled faintly and excused herself early, retreating to the bathroom where she sat on the cold tile floor, holding the test once more. The thought circled relentlessly. I can't do this. Not like this. By midnight, she had made a decision, or at least the beginning of one. The shame, the uncertainty, the fear of raising a child who might not even belong to Ethan. It all pointed in one direction. She would end it. Victoria whispered it into the silence, her voice shaking. I'll end it. But even as the words left her lips, her heart resisted. The appointment slip sat heavy in Victoria's purse, as though it carried the weight of her shame. She had scheduled it in a quiet voice over the phone, barely able to say the words. The woman on the other end had simply asked for the date of her last cycle, given her a time and told her to bring an ID. It all felt disturbingly routine. That morning, she wrapped a scarf tightly around her neck and walked briskly through the icy streets of Boston toward the women's health clinic. The city was waking up around her, commuters rushing to the T, steam rising from manholes. But she moved in a fog, her eyes fixed on the pavement. Each step echoed a mantra she wasn't sure she believed. It's the only way. It has to be the only way. Inside, the clinic was quiet, the walls painted a sterile shade of pale blue. Women of different ages sat scattered in the waiting area, eyes lowered to their phones, coats draped across their laps. No one spoke. Victoria checked in at the front desk and was given a clipboard, her hands trembling as she filled out the forms. When her name was called, her legs felt like lead as she followed the nurse down the narrow hallway. The nurse opened the door to a consultation room. Dr. Reed will be with you shortly, she said. Victoria stepped inside and the world stopped. Behind the desk sat Gabriel Reed, clean-shaven now, wearing a white coat over a neatly pressed shirt, his hazel eyes clear and sharp. He looked up from a patient chart, and for a brief second, surprise flickered across his face. Then his expression softened into something calm, steady, almost inevitable. Victoria, he said quietly. Her throat closed. Of all the doctors in all of Boston, it had to be him. The man she had carried home half-conscious. The man she had clung to in despair. The man who might be the father of the child she was here to end. She sank into the chair opposite him, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the tick of a clock on the wall. Gabriel set the chart aside, his voice even but gentle. "Are you certain this is what you want?" Victoria forced herself to nod. Yes, but her voice cracked. He leaned back, studying her. "I won't try to change your mind if you're sure. But I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." Her eyes lifted, meeting his. "Are you ending this pregnancy because you don't want the child," he asked, "or because you're afraid?" The words landed like a strike. Victoria's breath caught, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then whispered, I don't know." Gabriel's expression softened. Fear is powerful. It convinces us we can't survive what's ahead. But you're stronger than you think. She shook her head, anger and grief tangling inside her. "You don't understand. My husband, he betrayed me. I don't even know who this child belongs to. If it's his, if it's yours," her voice broke. "I can't carry that uncertainty." Gabriel didn't flinch. He folded his hands on the desk. "Then let me tell you something about uncertainty. The night we met, I was drunker than I had ever been in my life. My father had just died after months of suffering. We held the memorial at that nightclub because it was his favorite place to dance. I drank until I collapsed. And then you appeared. You picked me up off the ground when no one else would. That night you saved me." Victoria's tears spilled over. She had never known the weight he carried that night. He leaned forward. "Now you sit here, thinking of ending a life that could be ours. I won't condemn you, but I need you to see this clearly. You're not here because you don't want a child. You're here because you're afraid of the pain, of the judgment, of being alone. Am I wrong?" The truth stung. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. "I can't do this by myself." "You won't," Gabriel said softly. "Whatever you decide, you're not alone." For the first time in weeks, a crack appeared in the armor of her despair. His words didn't erase the fear, but they lit a small flame in the darkness. The nurse knocked gently, reminding them of the time. Gabriel stood, placing the chart back on the desk. "You don't have to decide today. Take a night. If you return tomorrow and still want this, I'll proceed. But don't choose from fear. Choose from truth." Victoria rose unsteadily, clutching her purse. At the door, she paused, looking back at him. His eyes held no judgment, only quiet sadness. She walked out into the frigid Boston air, the slip of paper with her appointment still crumpled in her hand. But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear, another decision had begun to take root. By the time she reached her apartment, she knew. She would not go back. She would not end it. The child would live. Victoria packed in silence. The once shared home, filled with polished hardwood floors and framed photographs of a life she thought she knew, had become unbearable. Every corner carried the echo of betrayal. The laugh Ethan had shared with that girl at the party, the lies he told with practiced ease. She moved methodically, folding clothes, sliding them into 2 suitcases, pausing only when her eyes landed on the wedding photo on the dresser. She turned the frame, face down. By dawn, she had arranged the legal paperwork. The attorney she contacted assured her the process of transferring her share of the salon could be done quickly. She would sign everything over to Ethan. The business no longer mattered. What she needed was freedom. When she left the keys and documents on the director's desk at the salon, the staff whispered among themselves, stunned by her abrupt departure. Victoria offered no explanation. She couldn't bear to recount the humiliation or the secret that now grew inside her. That evening, Ethan appeared at the door of her new apartment. He carried roses, the crimson blooms trembling slightly as he held them out. His face was painted with remorse, his voice soft, coaxing. "Victoria, please, let's talk. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this." For a moment, she almost believed him. He had always been persuasive, always quick with charm when he needed to repair his image. But as he stepped inside, the bouquet between them, she saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes. Then she spoke, her voice steady but quiet. "I'm pregnant." The flowers sagged in his hand. He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. At first, there was only silence, the air heavy, his jaw tightening. Then his composure cracked. His voice dropped into a low, simmering anger. "Pregnant? 8 weeks? Is it mine?" Victoria lifted her chin. "I don't know." His face twisted, the mask of remorse vanishing. "You slept with someone else." His tone was sharp, accusatory, as if her desperation, her single night of weakness, was equal to his months of betrayal. "Yes," she answered simply. "On the night of the party, when you kissed that girl in front of everyone. So this is revenge." Ethan's voice rose, echoing in the small apartment. He dropped the roses onto the floor, petals scattering across the wood like drops of blood. "You wanted to hurt me, so you went out and— This isn't revenge," Victoria cut in, her voice firm, unwavering. "This is consequence. You broke us, Ethan. You destroyed what we had. That night it was desperation. But this child, whatever happens, will not be defined by your betrayal." His chest heaved with anger. He stared at her, searching for some sign of submission, some hint that she might bend. But Victoria stood tall, her hand unconsciously brushing against her abdomen as if shielding the life inside. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You'll regret walking away from me." "No," she said softly. "The only regret I'd have is staying." For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of the roses at his feet as his shoe shifted against them. Then Ethan turned sharply, storming out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Victoria exhaled, her body trembling, but it wasn't fear. It was release. She leaned against the door, eyes closed, tears slipping down her cheeks, not tears of despair but of relief. At last the decision was made. She had walked away. A month passed. Winter clung to Boston with its unforgiving wind, piling snow along the edges of narrow Beacon Hill streets. Victoria's apartment was small, just one bedroom with tall windows overlooking the brick facades and gas lamps outside. It was quiet, too quiet, except for the rhythmic hum of the radiator. She tried to fill the silence with work, setting up an online store from her laptop, but loneliness lingered in every corner. She hadn't seen Ethan since the night he stormed out. He had left her in anger, and she had let him go without looking back. Some nights she worried he might return, but the fear faded with each day of silence. What remained was the slow, cautious acceptance that she was truly on her own. Then, one Saturday evening, a knock sounded at her door. Victoria froze. For a moment, her heart leapt with dread, imagining Ethan's voice demanding answers. But when she opened the door, it was Gabriel. He stood there in a wool coat dusted with snow, holding a paper bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. His hazel eyes met hers with quiet steadiness. "May I come in?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Gabriel walked in, placing the bag on the small kitchen table. The aroma of homemade soup filled the room as he unpacked containers, bread and fruit. Victoria watched in silence, unsure what to say. "You don't have to do this," she finally murmured. "I know," Gabriel replied simply, removing his coat. "But I want to." They ate together at the little table, not speaking much. Gabriel didn't press her with questions, didn't probe into her fears or decisions. He simply sat across from her, offering presence instead of demands. That silence, the absence of judgment, was something Victoria hadn't realized she craved until then. After dinner, he washed the dishes as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Victoria leaned against the doorway, watching him. His movements were steady, practiced. There was no urgency, no pretense. Just a man quietly making himself useful in a space that wasn't his. When he finished, he turned, drying his hands on a towel. "How have you been managing?" Victoria hesitated, then admitted, "Some days are harder than others." He nodded, not offering platitudes, not pretending to fix what couldn't be fixed. Instead, he simply said, "That's normal. You don't have to be strong all the time." Something in her chest loosened. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been holding herself together until he gave her permission to let go. That evening became the first of many. Gabriel began stopping by once or twice a week, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting with her as she worked. He never overstayed, never intruded, but he became a steady presence. Victoria found herself waiting for those evenings. It wasn't romance, there were no declarations, no stolen kisses, but it was something steadier, quieter, a companionship born not of passion, but of mutual understanding. One night, as they sat on the couch, Victoria resting with her hands folded over her stomach, she whispered, "What if this baby isn't yours?" Gabriel looked at her calmly. "Then it isn't. But if it is, we'll face that too. Either way, the child deserved a chance. And you deserve not to carry the weight alone." His words settled into her like warmth after a long chill. She turned to him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, but found none. He wasn't offering illusions or promises of a perfect future. He was simply offering to stand beside her, however uncertain the path might be. Slowly, Victoria began to trust him, not in the way she had once trusted Ethan, blindly and completely, but in the way you trust someone who shows up consistently, who proves with actions rather than words. Weeks slipped into a rhythm. Gabriel would arrive with fresh produce from the market, set his coat neatly on the rack, and ask about her day. Sometimes they ate in silence. Sometimes they shared stories, his about long hospital shifts, hers about the challenges of starting a new business. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a sweeping love story, but for Victoria it was enough. It was the beginning of something that felt real. On a particularly cold night, as snow fell thick against the windows, Gabriel rose to leave. At the door, he paused, his gaze resting on her. "You're stronger than you know," he said softly, "but even strength needs someone to lean on. Don't forget that." When the door closed behind him, Victoria stood for a long time, her hand resting gently on her growing stomach. For the first time in months, she felt a quiet peace. Not certainty, not safety, but the assurance that she wasn't walking this road alone. By the 4th month of her pregnancy, Victoria's body had begun to change in ways she could no longer hide. Her small Beacon Hill apartment carried the quiet rhythm of a new life taking shape. The nausea had faded, replaced by a gentle swell of her belly. She spent her mornings answering emails for her fledgling online business, afternoons walking along the brick sidewalks, and evenings often shared with Gabriel. The quiet didn't last. One gray afternoon, a knock sounded at her door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there with a man in a tailored suit. The man introduced himself curtly as Ethan's attorney. Ethan pushed forward, his expression tight, his eyes hard. "We need to talk," Ethan said flatly. Victoria didn't move. Her hand instinctively pressed against her stomach, shielding the child. "About what?" "The baby," Ethan snapped. His attorney cleared his throat, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "We are requesting a paternity test," the lawyer said smoothly. "Mr. Morgan has reason to believe the child may not be his. If that's the case, he will not be held financially responsible. If it is, we'll be pursuing shared custody. Additionally, Mr. Morgan is seeking a fair division of marital assets." Victoria's pulse roared in her ears, but she held her ground. "No," she said simply. The attorney raised an eyebrow. "I'm afraid you don't have the authority to deny it. A petition can and will be filed in family court." Ethan stepped closer, his voice rising. "You think you can walk away from me, keep my business, and raise another man's kid under my name? You've lost your mind." Victoria stood in the doorway, her frame steady though her heart raced. "You forfeited the right to call yourself a husband the night you kissed another woman in front of everyone. And you forfeited the right to call yourself a father when you lied, when you chose betrayal over truth." Her words cut through the room like glass. Ethan's face flushed crimson. He took a step forward, but Victoria lifted her hand. Her palm pressed protectively against her belly, blocking his path. The gesture was instinctive, but it became more than that. It was a shield, a declaration. "This child will never be your bargaining chip," she said firmly. Behind her, Gabriel emerged from the kitchen. He had arrived earlier, bringing groceries and checking on her, and now he stepped into the doorway, his presence calm but resolute. He didn't speak at first, but his silent stance beside Victoria was unmistakable. He was there, ready to intervene if Ethan pushed further. Ethan's eyes flicked toward him, narrowing. "So this is him," he sneered. "The mystery man. The reason my ex-wife, Victoria interrupted sharply. Ethan's mouth snapped shut. For a moment, the room was filled only with the tense hum of confrontation. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the raw emotion playing out before him. Gabriel's voice finally broke the silence, calm but edged with steel. "You've made your position clear. Now you need to leave. Victoria doesn't owe you anything. Not her peace, not her home, and certainly not this child." Ethan's nostrils flared. "You think you can just step in? You don't even know if it's yours." Gabriel met his glare, without flinching. "Biology doesn't make someone a father. Choices do. And from what I've seen, you've already made yours." The words landed with the finality of a verdict. Ethan's hand tightened into a fist at his side, but he didn't advance. His attorney touched his arm, urging restraint. "Mr. Morgan, this isn't the place." Victoria stood taller, her back straight, her hand still, guarding her stomach. "You can file whatever papers you want. But understand this, Ethan, I will fight you. Not out of spite, but because this child deserves safety. And that's something you can't provide." For a long moment, Ethan's rage battled with the reality of her resolve. Then, with a muttered curse, he turned on his heel, shoving past his attorney as he stormed down the hallway. The lawyer offered a stiff nod, gathered his briefcase, and followed. When the door finally clicked shut, the apartment fell into silence. Victoria's legs trembled, but she remained at the door, her hand pressed firmly against her stomach. Gabriel moved closer, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" She exhaled, shakily nodding. "I had to stand up to him. For the baby." Gabriel's hand lingered, his voice steady. "You did more than that. You showed him you're not afraid anymore." Her eyes lifted to his, and in that moment she realized the truth. She wasn't alone. Gabriel's presence wasn't just comfort, it was protection, a quiet strength that had begun to intertwine with her own. As the last of the winter light faded outside, Victoria stepped away from the door, her hand still cradling the curve of her belly. The confrontation had left her shaken, but it had also clarified something deep within her. This wasn't about Ethan anymore. This was about the child she carried, and the family she was beginning to build, however unconventional, with the man who chose to stand beside her. Spring had arrived in Boston, softening the bitter edge of winter. The magnolia trees bloomed along Commonwealth Avenue, their pale petals drifting through the air like confetti. In a quiet hospital room overlooking the Charles River, Victoria gripped the side rails of the bed, her face contorted with pain as another contraction tore through her. Gabriel was at her side, his hand firmly clasping hers. He leaned close, his voice steady even as sweat beaded on her brow. "Breathe with me, Victoria. And out. You're doing so well." She bore down, clutching his hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. The pain came in waves, sharp and unrelenting, but his presence anchored her. Between contractions, she caught his gaze, calm, unwavering, resolute. It was as if he was willing her to hold on, to push through the storm. Hours blurred together. Nurses moved in and out, adjusting monitors, murmuring encouragement. But Victoria's world had narrowed to two things: the child fighting its way into the world and Gabriel's hand steady in hers. Finally, with one last desperate push, the cry of a newborn filled the room. The sound cracked through the tension like sunlight breaking a storm. Victoria collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. A nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms, a wrinkled face, fists clenched tight, lungs announcing her arrival to the world. Victoria stared at her daughter, all flooding her chest. "Sophia," she whispered. The name had come to her in a quiet moment weeks before, its meaning, wisdom, feeling like a promise. Gabriel brushed damp hair from Victoria's forehead, his own eyes shining. "She's beautiful," he said softly, "just like her mother." Sophia's cries softened as Victoria rocked her gently. For a moment, everything was still. The hum of the monitors, the footsteps in the hallway, the muted city sounds outside. All that mattered was the fragile new life in her arms and the man who had stood beside her through every contraction. The door opened quietly. Ethan stepped inside. He carried no flowers this time, no grand gestures. Just a small box of infant clothes tucked under his arm. His face was pale, his eyes hollow as they fell on Victoria, holding Sophia. For a long moment he didn't move. He simply stood there, staring at the child he once might have claimed without question. "May I?" he asked finally, his voice low. Victoria hesitated, then tilted the blanket back just enough for him to see. Ethan stepped closer, leaning over the hospital bed. His breath caught as he studied Sophia's tiny features, her dark lashes fluttering, her mouth opening in a soft sigh. "She looks," he began, then stopped. His voice cracked. "She looks like herself." Victoria nodded. "Yes, she does." Silence settled over them, heavy but not hostile. For a fleeting second, she almost saw the man she had once loved, the Ethan from years ago, before betrayal, before lies. But then his eyes flicked to hers, sharp with an unspoken question. "We should do a paternity test," he said quietly, "just to know." Victoria's jaw tightened. She pulled Sophia closer, her voice steady. "No, there will be no test." Ethan straightened, frowning. "Don't you want certainty?" "I already have it," Victoria replied. "This child is mine. And you." She met his gaze without flinching. "You chose someone else. Live with that." The words landed with finality, closing the last door between them. Ethan lingered for a moment longer, his face a mixture of regret and anger, then placed the box of clothes on the chair. He bent down, brushed his lips against Victoria's forehead in a gesture that felt hollow, and left the room without another word. It was the last time she ever saw him. The door clicked shut, leaving only the soft hum of machines and Sophia's quiet breaths. Gabriel returned to Victoria's side, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. Victoria looked down at Sophia, then up at Gabriel, her chest swelling with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "We did it," she corrected softly. Outside the window, the sun dipped over the Charles, painting the river in gold. Inside, a new chapter had begun. The weeks after Sophia's birth blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights, quiet feedings, and the tender chaos of new motherhood. Victoria's world had narrowed to the rhythm of her daughter's cries, the softness of her tiny hands, and the fragile weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. Yet she was not alone. Gabriel was there. He came every morning before his hospital shifts, sometimes carrying fresh bagels from a cafe down the street, sometimes just a thermos of coffee. He held Sophia so Victoria could shower, changed diapers without complaint, and stayed through long evenings when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. His presence was steady, grounding. He never demanded gratitude, never asked for more than she could give. As spring gave way to summer, Gabriel made a decision of his own. With savings and a small loan, he opened a private clinic in a modest brick building near Boston's South End. It wasn't grand, just 3 examination rooms and a reception area, but it was a place where he could care for patients on his own terms. He worked long hours, yet he always returned to Victoria and Sophia, his evenings spent in the quiet glow of their apartment rather than the noise of the city. Victoria, too, began rebuilding. With the remnants of her business experience, she launched an online beauty store from home. At first, sales trickled in slowly, just a handful of orders a week. But she poured herself into it during Sophia's naps, photographing products by the window for natural light, answering customer messages with personal notes. Word spread, and by autumn her store began to grow. The hum of packing boxes replaced the silence that had once haunted her apartment. Life settled into a rhythm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. On Saturdays, Gabriel would wheel Sophia's stroller through the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill while Victoria walked beside him, her hand brushing against his. They weren't married, not even officially a couple, yet there was a quiet intimacy in their companionship. Sophia, as she grew, became the heart of their little household. By her first birthday, she was toddling across the living room floor, her laughter filling every corner. One afternoon, as she stumbled into Gabriel's waiting arms, the words slipped out, clear, certain. "Dad." Victoria froze, her hands halfway through folding laundry. Gabriel looked up, startled, his eyes wide. Then Sophia giggled, clinging to his leg. The word had come naturally, uncoached, as if it had always belonged to him. A lump rose in Victoria's throat. She met Gabriel's gaze, and for a moment neither spoke. But no words were needed. Sophia had named the truth they had both been living. Still, Gabriel never pressed for labels, never pushed for promises. He continued showing up, building his clinic, supporting Victoria's store, and above all, being there for Sophia. And in that quiet consistency, love took root. Not the fiery, impulsive love of her younger years, but a steady flame that promised endurance. One golden evening the following summer, they sat together in Boston Common, the oldest park in the city. The grass was warm beneath them, and the air hummed with the sounds of children playing. Sophia, now a sturdy toddler with dark curls and bright eyes, ran across the grass chasing bubbles another child had released. Her laughter carried on the breeze, bright and unbroken. Victoria leaned back against a bench, her shoulders finally relaxed. Gabriel sat beside her, a medical journal resting forgotten on his lap as his eyes followed Sophia's every move. "She's fearless," he said with quiet pride. Victoria smiled. "She gets that from you." He chuckled. "I'm not so sure." For a long while they sat in silence, watching Sophia tumble into the grass, pick herself up and run again. Around them, Boston moved as it always had. Tourists snapping photos, joggers weaving through paths, the skyline glowing in the evening sun. But for Victoria, the world had slowed to this moment. Her daughter's laughter, Gabriel's steady presence, the peace she never thought she would find. As the sun dipped lower, painting the park in amber light, Victoria felt the swell of realization. The life she once clung to, the marriage, the salon, the image of perfection, was gone. In its place was something quieter but infinitely stronger. She glanced at Gabriel, then back at Sophia, and the truth formed in her heart with clarity. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It was about choosing to stay when things were difficult, choosing to protect rather than to wound, choosing to love without conditions. Victoria reached for Gabriel's hand. He didn't look at her, not immediately, but his fingers closed around hers, strong and certain. Together, they watched Sophia chase the last of the bubbles across the grass, her laughter ringing out like a promise. And for the first time in years, Victoria felt whole.